Hello there. This is just a bite-sized peek into our comprehensive back-end development course, and I'm all about sharing snippets like this on our YouTube free of charge, so sit back and enjoy the video. But if you're interested in diving deeper, why not consider a Covalence community membership for just $25 a month? It's your golden ticket to a full-stack learning experience, curating all of these videos into a comprehensive course, complete with lecture notes, reference sheets, and challenging labs that are really going to push your learning into overdrive. But the perks don't end there. You're going to unlock the keys to our front end and our React, or my React course as well. Not to mention you're going to have access to live Discord support, meaning you can harass me all you want, exclusive coding events, plus professional assistance for crafting killer portfolios and resumes. Just think of it as your personal coding toolkit, ready and waiting to help you build your future. So check the description down below for a link, and remember, whether you're here for a casual browse or a deep dive, just enjoy the video. All right, my intrepid students, we have talked about, well, a lot so far in this walkthrough series, connecting to a database to a simple schema with some information inside of it, using a driver, a connecting library such as MySQL or MySQL2, and the things that come. Again, we're making choices, and they're going to come with consequences whether we like it or not. Writing some queries out in console, logging them, adding TypeScript, and the new challenges and benefits that introduces to our code projects here. We talked about writing these utility queries to quickly and easily run our queries across our project, and also receive benefits from TypeScript in this case. And again, like I said a second ago, the challenges that come with that, the choices we have to make along the way, because no matter what, this is all a trade-off. Whatever choices we're making, we're gonna have to deal with the consequences one way or the other. Like, I'm choosing to write it all by hand here, and an ORM could speed this entire process up. When I need to run a ton of custom queries, writing them by hand, if I know something like SQL, I think that's easier than having to use all the functions provided by an ORM that may get in our way or have opinions that we don't agree with and have to kind of deal with, right? So again, whether I code it all by hand or use an ORM to speed up the process, I'm going to have some consequences to deal either way. It just depends on the scale of the project, the deadline if this is for a client, for example, and things like that. But yeah, we talked about all that, and I gave an example of what finally your code might look like once we get it all like written out. And I actually haven't talked about how we finally get all this involved in an endpoint, and I want to cover some basics of organizing, which again will be my personal opinion of how you, the student, should begin to organize it, but ultimately it comes down to your preferences, what you understand and what you like. I will always recommend this to y'all from the first time we have a webinar together to the last. If you're gonna be wrong, at least just be consistently wrong. That way it's an easy thing to fix. So try and be consistent in how you organize things for a given project. You may end up not liking it and want to change it all. That's okay. It's a lot easier to change it if you are consistently doing it one way throughout the whole project. So again, that's my advice. You might change between projects. Lord knows I have between projects. Like, something I coded a month ago I think is trash, and I do it a new way, and I think it's the best thing ever. And then in a new project a couple months from now, I'm like, man, that old one was trash. Let's try this really new way. I like doing it now. So again, like, you'll evolve your own practices and standards and things like that. You'll find articles and other videos I make that show you something cool you may not have considered before, and etc. So the patterns I'm about to show y'all here are not the way to do it. It is just the way I prefer to do it, and the way I'm going to teach y'all to do it, to give y'all like a good fundamental understanding. Okay, enough rambling. Let's actually write some code here. So I mentioned that I actually need to get Express up and running so I can show y'all how to add this, how simple it is to add all this work we have done to an endpoint, and to finally get it, going. So let's see what we can get going here. So I'm going to go to my console window. I don't think it's running since between these videos. Yeah, I'm just in my directory and haven't ran the code or anything. I am going to install Express as a library for you to use in this project. I also need the typings for Express, which I'll install into my dev dependencies. Like this. There we go. Booyah, my 2 installations are done. Let's go ahead and run this project. I realize this is not scaled to the window size of 1080 for this recording. There we go, that's better. Yeah, and I ran npm run dev because it just console logs this, but I'll have to stop and restart this anyway, so I don't know why I did that. But either way, okay, we know it works still, which is nice. Nothing's changed since the video. I'm gonna get rid of this this code right here. I'm gonna leave the comments in for now. I don't need that technically anymore. So there we go. Okay. Let's go ahead and bring in Express and start building something out. I'm going to say import Express from Express. I don't really care where it is. I'll do it somewhere near the bottom. I don't really care. Const app equals call to Express that returns a configured Express application to us. I'll go ahead and write my get request to /API/users. That API prefix is not needed there. However, for new students, I do recommend that you add the API prefix to your API routes, because once you combine this with a front end, you're going to have especially an SPA such as React, which is what our boilerplate does. You need to be aware of, is this a client-side route that's meant for a web page to be viewing, or is this a API or server-side route that deals with CRUD applications, get, read, update, destroy, create, read, update, destroy, on a resource, for example. So is this an API server route, or is this a client-side view route? And, that API prefix just helps you, the newer student that's figuring this stuff out, know which one is which just by a quick visual digestion. So, a lot of the times APIs will have prefixes and things like that. I just suggest you start with this one just to make your life easier in this learning process. Okay, so if it starts with API or auth or something like that, more than likely it's a server-side route. You test it in Postman, and the only way your website views it is by making a fetch request to it. So I'll go ahead and make this an asynchronous callback function so I can use my handy dandy await keyword. We're going to rec res right there, request response. With TypeScript, the typings nothing's changed here. With TypeScript, it's the same endpoints y'all have always written, as y'all are aware. Rec and res just now have some nice autocomplete features on them that you may not have had in vanilla JavaScript. I'll go ahead and write my try catch block here. This is where I like to personally error handle, and if I had a global error handler, this would simply be next error. But instead, we're going to set a status code of 500, and we'll send an error message that says internal server error or something simple like that. Nothing too complex here, just enough to get this going. Yeah. Okay, so our code. Remember, I had this DB object that should result in a list of users. So I'm going to say, or db.users.getAll. Const users equals await a call to db.users.getAll, and then we're going to send a JSON response of my list of users from this API endpoint. So get request to localhost 3000 API users should call the db.users.getAll function, which should give us a list of users that I can then modify if I need to, or just send as my response. And again, all that work we did in the previous walkthroughs gives us a very clean looking endpoint that keeps our networking layer separate from our data layer. Now, I know they're in the same file here. Like I said, we'll get to talking about some organization concepts and patterns here in just a moment. But this is a very solid looking endpoint. So if someone had to go and mess with the query, and I'm working on some network stuff inside of the users file, the API users file, for example, then right here, this is good separation of concern, right? I can be working on the actual CRUD routes while someone is debugging a query problem in a different file. We're not working in the same file, and we can both work with Git and GitHub collaboratively without stepping on each other's toes. Again, why we take the time to do all this. Which again, at the end of the day, I could just have this raw-ass query written over directly inside of this route if I wanted to. But that works. And for a small project, that's all you need. Just go for it. But understand that in a bigger scale, it's not a good idea. Okay, like I was saying, let's go back to what we're doing. Const port equals 3000. App listen, not link, listen on this port. And we're going to give a callback that will console log server running on port 3000, or port rather. And I realize I need to turn this into a template literal so I can do interpolation. There we go. Switch them single quotes to backticks, folks, and we're good to go. Yeah, I believe we had this up and running. I shouldn't call it db.ts. I'm going to call it server.ts because that makes more sense now for a name since it's going to run and start my server. So my package JSON, we're going to come in here and, ooh, I just realized that I need to resize all my windows. Goodness me, Luke. Get professional here. There we go. I record between 1440 and 1080, which can be annoying to have to remember to switch my window sizes on. All right, but there we go. Yes, I don't think anything scrolled off the window view there anyway. But yeah, there we go. That's what we're looking at. This is our lovely, remember we just changed in our package JSON this to server.ts just now. And that means we can run this project and theoretically get a list of users. So let's go check that out. I'm going to stop what I currently have. Rerun npm run dev. There we go. I'm going to open a new commander window. You can also do this on your Mac terminals by hitting Command T. You can open a split right and left or bottom, in my case, window, where I'm going to open a new window on the bottom. because what I would like to do is run the following command: localhost :3000/API/users. This is basically our terminal version of fetch. If you're not familiar with this command, you can do some quick Googling on it, but basically we were making a fetch request or an HTTP request to this endpoint on our server running on this host and port. The -I just gives us some additional information about the request that Postman would also be showing you here. So yeah, let's go ahead and run that. I see a list of users, ID 11 named Toad right over there. That tells me very clearly that the query is properly running and I got my request set up with no issues whatsoever. So yeah, no, y'all, we got ourselves a server now running and sending this query as a response. So if you remember from the React labs where you began actually messing with APIs, I did walkthroughs, for example, using JSON placeholder. If you talk to me in Discord at all, or if you're a full-time student, like a Catalyst student, and you are in webinars, then you know that Andrew and I and any of their co-instructors probably have shown y'all different APIs, like the Pokemon API, Poke API, the Star Wars API, aka Swappy. You've used the Studio Ghibli API. Like, all these APIs probably read from files or databases and send them as a response to requests to API endpoints. And guess what? That's what we've done. You've learned everything in this course you've learned so far has led you up to this moment right yonder, being able to get a list of stuff from a database displaying via a fetch request. Now, I just did a curl here in a terminal, but there's the -I part, by the way. It will tell you that the information about the response that came back to you, right? It's an HTTP status code. The content type contains JSON, how long it is, and some other information about it. So that's the -I part providing some additional info for us. But you can do this in Postman. This is a GET request, so you could go to the browser and write localhost :3000/API/users, and it will also show this information. So, I mean, we've done it. Like, the goal of this walkthrough is technically done. But like I said, this is not how you're going to be doing things in your projects. So I'm going to go ahead and take the time to show you some ideas to structure and organize your code in a certain way. Because as of right now, it's all crammed into one server TS file, which is not how it's probably going to work in the real world. So, because we're dealing with TypeScript, I'm going to go ahead and include a source folder because eventually I may need to compile and run this. I won't in this walkthrough, but realistically, if you're writing TypeScript style code, you're going to have a source folder. I'm going to move server.ts into the source folder, and now we're going to begin breaking some things apart, and we're going to have to deal with a bunch of errors until I get it fixed. So here's what we're going to do. This MySQL pool creation is very important, and eventually you're going to learn about environment variables and how these are going to be hidden away. That's for a different video when I get into third-party APIs and we actually have like API keys that we want to keep hidden. I don't want to do a lot of repeating myself or redundancy, so just wait for that, and just know that this hard-written code right here will be changed eventually with dynamically generated code that keeps things hidden. But for now, I'm going to leave it hard-coded, but I will show you how to isolate this because it is important to isolate so you can have like one file that establishes the connection, which, let's do that. In my newly created source folder, I'm going to make another new folder, and we're going to call it DB or database. This is going to be all things database related. So I'm going to have a new file. We're going to call it connection.ts. Its sole purpose is to import the appropriate libraries, establish the connection pool, and then export the pool for use wherever else we may need it. So that means I'm going to cut that pool and paste it here. And at bare minimum, we have to have the MySQL library imported, specifically the MySQL2 promise. So there we go. We have that pool now configured in this file, and we're going to have to use it in other files. So I'm going to choose to do a default level export. By exporting this variable out from this connection file and using it wherever else I need to. So this connection file will be just this. Its sole purpose is to set up and establish the connection to the database. This will eventually be replaced by environment variables, and that's the only code that really needs to be here, right? It's one of those important configuration files that we are going to keep as simple as possible. So that's it. That's all we're going to do right here. Next, we have some query utilities that rely on that pool. And these query utilities clearly will be reused across my code base anywhere I can, right? Especially, not anywhere I can, but rather they're going to be reused in all of my users' queries. If this was a to-do project, maybe I have a to-dos table with a to-dos set of queries that will also be using these base, select, and modify queries. So that makes sense. We might have a file called query utils or something akin to that. It doesn't really matter what you call it. It could even be pizza. But query utils, as a developer, I would come and read that and be like, okay, clearly some utilities for running queries. Let me go take a look at there first, because they're probably using them for setting up some standardized responses and things like that. So that's what we're going to have here. I'm going to go over yonder and cut my 2 utilities and paste them here. I'm going to add the export keyword in front of both of them, like that. That way I have the select and modify query being exported out without too much issue. Next, I know I need to import and use the pool inside of here, so I will say import by default my pool connection from the connection file. That way I have the pool available here. Next, we have the result header and things like the result header type. So I'm going to go up yonder and probably copy this thing here and paste it right there. And row data packet, I believe I use on my interface itself. But there we go. I now have my 2 queries set up and ready to go. I didn't choose to do a default export on these because sometimes I might import one and not the other depending on the project. So I'm going to choose to make them named exports in this case. I should just do a default with both under like one object name, but whatever. Doesn't matter, right? It's just patterns. So here we go. We got my 2 things exported out, ready to go. Query utils are now correctly set up. Next, how should I do this for y'all? Let's just do it this way. Well, in this particular project, we have one table. Select star from users. That's all we got going on here. That's fine, right? Like, you know, there's nothing magical behind that. But, you know, in a larger scale project, I might have like a users table, a to-dos table, maybe like a messages table, comments table, chat room or something like that. And as you can see, like the more tables I have, the more queries that each one will have. So rather than having like one file called like queries here or something like that, you may consider making an individual file for each possible table or resource that is going to have queries associated with it. Meaning I might produce a users folder for all things involving users, which may include its interface or any custom interfaces when we begin joining complex data that might be important for us to have an individual interfaces file for our users' queries. When you work with ORMs and more complex projects, you have a concept sometimes called models that will be like a class that represents the selected data and all methods associated with it. So we might have all of our queries written in a file, our interfaces written in a file, and then they're all combined into something called a model that would say, hey, one user will have these class properties available on it, and it will have these methods available on it to update a user, destroy, select all, select one, etc., etc. So you know, I'm not going to go that far here because that'll be total overkill for this project and confuse y'all who are just learning this stuff. So we're going to keep it simple. I probably would, in a big scale project, say be prepared to see a folder for each table or resource that this project will be working with. And that file, or that folder rather, will probably have one thing for its interfaces or types if it has them, models if it has them, queries if it has them, and probably an index file that can help combine and export all things for simplicity. But in our case, how about we just keep it simple and, you know, I might have a folder that we might call resources, or how should we do? Let's just make a new file. We're going to call it users.ts. And again, this is where you might see a users folder that represents all things users. In my case, because of the scale of this project, and probably what y'all are going to have as well, and for more understanding and clarity when you're first starting out with this stuff, I think cramming everything into one file instead of separated files in a parent directory, it'll be easier to understand. So let's go ahead and just do it this way. I'm going to take this interface and paste it over yonder. We need to have that row data packet imported type there as well. So I'm going to cut this finally and paste it over here and remove the one I don't need. There we go. There's that part. Realistically, this interface may be used somewhere else. So I might choose to export it out just in case I need to have it available somewhere else. There we go. Next, back in my server, we recall that my function here, get all users, is the function that I want to have available for my list of users. So I'll go ahead and write that down yonder. Now, this will be behind an object, as we saw, called db.users. So the user, get all users, might be redundant in the naming department here, so I might just call this function getAll like that. Clearly, the select query is not available down yonder as of yet, so I'll go ahead and say import select query from the query utils file. I like to have my TypeScript type imports written below my regular imports. Personal preference. It doesn't actually matter what order they're in, I believe. I'm going to go ahead and write the export keyword in front of my function getAll. That way it is available in any other place I need to import it as. Yeah, beautiful. So let's go ahead and see what else I got to do here. I think that's really about it. Yeah. Looking good. So I'm going to go ahead and we could theoretically go ahead and just import this getAll function exactly where I need to import it at. But again, I'm going to go ahead and cut this from here. That doesn't need to be there anymore, nor does this. Okay. Now we're getting somewhere. We're really cleaning stuff up, aren't we? So here's what we're going to do. Index files are the default searched for file if we write an import statement of a directory name that doesn't include a file. So if I write import db and no connection.ts or query utils, for example, it will look for an index file. So we're going to use an index file trick here to say, hey, this index file will set up all of our DB queries for us, where this is just the connection, this is just the utilities, this will be all things users. If I had a todos.ts, a messages.ts, all those resources will be their own files that will then be linked up over here. So I'm going to say import asterisk as users from users. This means I will import all things exported from the users file, which would be, looks like the interface and this function called getAll. Maybe I'll have one called get1, for example. Let's go ahead and write that. Let's go ahead and write export function get1. It will return the exact same select query with a difference here, where it might say where ID equals 1. So you're wondering, Luke, why not provide the ID parameter here? Because I still need to show y'all how I will set up how to prevent SQL injection attacks and things like that. But for now, let's just keep on doing it the hard-coded way. As you can see right here, we're going to have that ID equals 1 there. So now, import star from as users means import all three of these things under a new namespace or object called users. So it'll be users.iUserRow, users.getAll, and users.get1. Now, if I want to import something from this file, I will now write export, and let's do default on this one. I'll set up a new object that has a property called users. Remember, this is a shorthand for users:users. So the property is db, represented by this object. This object, we'll call it the db object, has a property called db.users, whose value will be all things we imported under this variable called users. So that's shorthand right there, is how we get db.users. .getAll. That's how that code is going to come into play. So that's what our index files looks like. Like, again, its sole purpose is to set up this kind of daisy-chained process of importing all of our queries for our resources finally, and exporting them under a singular object to import to our API endpoints for use finally. So that part is now set up. I'm going to collapse my DB folder since I'm done working there and open a new folder called maybe routes. Inside the routes file, I'm going to make a file called users.ts. I'm going to say import a new router from Express, because I don't need the entire Express library. I just need what the router can do. I'm going to set up a new router. We're going to call it a capital R router. I'm going to say this router is going to have a new get endpoint that will be the / to get all users. And I will say, oh, wait, I already had this written. What am I doing? This is this right here. Oopsie. Cut it and paste it, folks. That's all we got to do. But we do need to change from an app to a router. There we go. The DB import needs to be fixed. So we're going to say import DB from up1 directory DB. That will automatically look for that index file. As you can see, I didn't write /index. It looks for /index automatically. That's that default import structure. So if you import a folder, Node will automatically look for an index file inside of that folder. That's the entry point of folders, directories. In these statements, when we're going to take advantage of that by giving us some clean looking import statements. So there we go. That's our router. We're going to go ahead and export this router out. Now I could bring this directly into my project. So let's do it this way. Yeah, we'll do /users to get all users from this router endpoint right here. And this router, I'm going to import into my server and write it from there. So yeah, let's do it that way. Import users router from /routes/users. You know what? No, we did the index thing in the DB. I don't think it's a stretch to give you all that information here too. So let's go ahead and make a new file in routes called index.ts. This was going to import a new router. Sorry about that last second change up here, folks. This will set up another new router like this. Yeah. And this one will import and use the users router from this directory users. I'm going to say the router is going to use on the path of /users the logic in users router. So I'm going to go back to that users endpoint and remove /users, as that's now going to be prefixed in the index file. So my endpoint is still / for all users. Prefix that with /users. Now let's export this router out of this file. And now we're going to import it finally into our server file. So in our server file, this is going to be called the API router from the routes index file. So that index file we just set up is going to be considered our API router. So I'll say here app use on the path of API, the API router. So remember, these paths all stack in Express. We learned this in our Chirper API labs and the one lab before that, whatever that was. I think it was the Express API lab, where the prefix API, when the request is matched, goes into the API router, which is routes index. This matches here and says /users, and then our endpoint is just /. This winds up with a GET request to /API /users. Leave these comments here if they do help you remember what these endpoints are as you're figuring this out. I've coded this long enough to where I understand how this pathing and procedure works, but again, if it helps you remember, always write down these comments here to how to make requests these endpoints after you test them and things like that. So yeah, that's just something to keep in mind. But look at that. We have a very clean and organized project now, something that I would be happy to see if you turn this in if it was a lab. Again, is this what is going to be done in every single project ever? No. Is this what you're going to see on production level stuff? Probably not. But a lot of the fundamental concepts I've shown y'all here is what you will see across code bases that you happen to find across the web. So remember, this is like one pattern that I think will teach y'all some good basics and set y'all up for not feeling so lost and confused when you see a larger scale application, for example. So yeah, that's it. Let's go back to our package.json because now it's source-server.ts. We're going to go over here and say source-server.ts. And now we're finally going to rerun the project and make that curl request again to see if it works. So npm run dev to restart our lovely little project here. Okay, we're up and running. I'm going to clear this window and run another curl request, and voila, it still works. Nothing has broken, which means we are good to go. Like I had mentioned before, we do have that get one query, I believe. Let's go back into DB, users. We have that get one query. Let's go ahead and try and include that in our list of endpoints. So here we go. I'm going to copy and paste this code because it will be useful down yonder. So here's what I'm going to do, actually. I'm going to make this the get all request right here. And I want the more specific route, aka if I had like a user with a parameter, to be up here because it's more specific than the general request of / with no parameter. So this route parameter is more specific. They both share the same method of get, and you want to include the more specific route paths up top and the more generic route paths on bottom. Remember, they are matched in order of importance from top to bottom. So you want to include the more specific ones up top and the more generic ones on bottom. That is a big thing you want to remember. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to say const. My goodness, I cannot read. Okay, there we go. Const id equals rec.params.id. Actually, I just realized this doesn't matter because we haven't hard coded, because I haven't shown y'all about escape parameters yet, to always be user ID 1. So, I don't need this part yet. We're going to just include that. We need this part up here. It doesn't matter what parameter we write, but we're going to write get one, for example, and this should theoretically return one user instead of users. Now, the variable name, once again, could just be pizza or response or result. It doesn't matter, but we're going to try and use some more meaningful variable names to make sure that, again, if someone else comes in here and reads this code, we know they have an idea of what we're trying to do. This is users. Oh, that's plural. This is user. That's singular. Oh, there's a route parameter. I know exactly what this API route's probably going to do. So let's just make this request right here and see how she works. I'm going to go ahead and go back to my window here and do /123. Again, the parameter doesn't matter as long as something is there as a parameter. It will match that route instead of get all, which should run our get one, but I got an error because I forgot to restart my server. Classic. Okay, there we go. Let's try that again. There we go. Check it out. We got that singular user right here. We see it's still an array of objects. Now, because I know it's an array of objects, see that little parameter right there? I just want the object itself, so I'm going to choose to destructure the user object right there, which, again, TS should know we have that available. Yeah, so it knows that we have now one iUser row object. So let's go back and rerun the command, restart the server, then rerun the curl command, and we should see just an object, which is something that you're used to seeing in most modern REST APIs. The get all is an array of objects. The get one is a singular object. And voila, we have done it with some cool scaling in our project here. Now, the next thing I want to show y'all in the next walkthrough video, because I think I've gone along enough on this one, I certainly have, is I want to show y'all how to take this parameter right here and actually feed it into this get one thing without causing any kind of issues. Because so far, I've only coded this out by one. And I realize now I probably should have shown y'all how to parameterize queries before TypeScript and all that stuff was added. But you know what? C'est la vie, right? We've worked with this basic query, and theoretically this will be just fine. But we know that we're going to learn that feeding in a singular number to this thing, or a number directly from a parameter that could be coded by a user, is not a good idea. So, yeah, well, I'll see y'all in the next video where I show y'all a final tip before we go on to whatever lab this walkthrough series will end with. So yeah, we're going to figure out why this is not a good idea, meaning what if I wanted to include a variable number one that came from a parameter right here, and why simply string concatenating the parameter directly into the query is a terrible idea with a XKCD comic, and then I'll show y'all the proper way to handle it. So yeah, see y'all there.